The Process Podcast, breaking down the daily habits, processes, and tools of high achievers. Now, here's your host, Brad Wilson.
Well, hello there, ladies and gentlemen. This is the host of the Process Podcast, Brad Wilson. As always, if you haven't yet taken a moment to subscribe to the show, I would be very grateful if you did that. And also, you would once a week get delivered brand new episodes of the Process Podcast directly onto your phone so that you will never, ever miss the systems and processes that allow my high-achieving guests get so much accomplished with the 24 hours that they have in every single day. Today's guest on the show is Oliver Durrer. Oliver's an entrepreneur, intrapreneur, which if you're like me and had no idea what that was, it's a fancy word for running a startup within a massive corporation. He's the chief marketing officer of blockchain-powered educational startup Odom.io and the founder of SwissLEAP, whose vision is to inspire lasting enterprise action practices in organizations to create shared value with passion and purpose. Oliver's with us on the show today because of a referral from previous guest Adrian Walker. Adrian loved being on the process so much that when our conversation was over, he told me he had the perfect guy for this show, and he wasn't wrong. Oliver's a natural empath who has, from a very early age, always had a burning curiosity about the why behind the often wacky and zany actions of human beings. It is this drive to understand those whys about others and himself that leads him through his life's journey. I jump around a little throughout this episode, but hang in there. There's tons of amazing value in this conversation. Also, as a final note, when I sent this off to my producer, he informed me that it sounded a little bit like I was trying to eat my microphone in this episode, so please excuse my volume. I blame it on the intermittent fasting. In this interview, you'll learn how to ask yourself and others the right questions that give you deep understanding in your pursuits, the correlation between safety and security and our personal freedom, a dive into Bitcoin, Ethereum, and the blockchain, where our biggest growth as human beings comes from, and much more. So without any further ado, here's my conversation with Oliver Durrer. Oliver, my friend, how are we doing today, sir?
Amazing. How are you?
I'm doing very well. Looking forward to this conversation, wishing that maybe I was on the West Coast like you in San Fran, but the weather's still nice on the East Coast. It's the fall pumpkin spice latte. I'm not ashamed to admit that I like the pumpkin spice. So I thought we would start this show at the beginning. That's where I like to start things. Tell me about your interest growing up as a young man.
I was, I guess I never really had this one big dream of what I wanted to become or what I wanted to be as a kid. I was, however, always interested in other people and in what makes us tick and what drives us and what motivates us and why. And I guess that was really something which you would qualify as nerdy or geeky. I don't know. I had so many interests. I guess I just like to learn about anything and especially about people.
So basically it's psychology, right? Understanding how people work, how they think. Why psychology? Why did that pique your interest so much?
There's a lot to human behavior, and if anything, it's not rational. And I guess as a kid, you kind of try to figure out, even with your parents, with your peers, so what works, what doesn't work, what is good behavior, what is, what does society expect from you, what do your parents expect from you, what do you expect from yourself? I guess that's one bit of the story, and the other is probably just I was a weird kid for sure. I felt like I was Spider-Man. I had this spider sense. And I think it's just some sort of empathy. A friend of mine has explained to me, which I didn't realize, that there's a difference between having empathy and being empathetic. And I had a tendency, so having empathy is, of course, putting yourself into other people's shoes and understanding how they feel. And then being empathetic is feeling with them, actually feeling what they feel. And I believe I had a tendency to be empathetic. So I could be really hypersensitive to stuff that was going around me, what was going on around me. And hence this kind of impression of having a spider sense, of being hyper alert to what was happening. And then, of course, I wanted to understand. I guess that's how that came about.
Any stories about humans in your life acting irrationally as a kid? That made you say, why did they do that? Why, or maybe even you acting irrationally and asking yourself, why did I do that?
Yeah, I think both. A specific example, probably at school, or I still have today. I sometimes say, okay, I'm speaking at the same time that I'm thinking. That's always not always the best idea. So I had moments where after the fact I was like, why didn't I do this or say that other thing? Why did I react the way I reacted? Why didn't I react? And also my mom, often after the fact, she's someone extremely respectful and very kind and very kind of putting other people's interests ahead of her own. But then also that might, or in some circumstances, that created sort of a frustration for her, because when she got kind of run over, proverbially speaking, and after the fact, she was like, why didn't I, stand up? Why didn't I say something? Why didn't I do this? Because actually it was pretty obvious that I was in the right. I could have done this, and she didn't. And I think it was these kinds of things that always really intrigued me. Why are we doing what we're doing or not doing what we could do?
And since it intrigued you, have you found any methods to do a better job of expressing yourself in the moment versus having a situation happen and then thinking, why didn't I do this?
Mm-hmm. Yes. Mindfulness, I guess, is the general term. It's funny because my mom always said that I should do yoga, that I should do something that kind of calms me down. I was hyperactive. Probably today you would say ADHD, or I don't know what kind of diagnosis that would correspond to. But I was always extremely an energy bundle and wanted to do a lot of things, etc. And I guess being more present, being more aware of yourself and your surroundings. I mean, I was aware of my surroundings, but probably I was not as aware of myself than I am now. And I think things like meditation, things like very simply just being more present in the moment help tremendously. But then also just think before you print, right? So that's why I now have this habit of saying, okay, I'm speaking at the same time that I'm thinking, and it's not always good because hashtag no filter, right? So sometimes it's a good thing to have a filter. And in that sense, I don't mean not being authentic, but just being more self-aware and a little more reflective before you say what you're about to say.
For sure. And it allows you to not be driven by emotion. Yeah. Or it allows emotions to have less of an effect, because emotions are much more powerful than rational thought. And it's easy to say, I just got emotional. I let my emotions get the better of me. But it doesn't have to be that way. We can realize the effect our emotions are having on us, and then pause and do a little better job. So this empathetic young man who's a bundle of energy, can you tell me about the role of technology in your life? When did you realize that you had this love for technology?
I guess that came about from my dad. My dad is an inventor and has always, almost anything that we kids, my brother and I, could come up with, could imagine that we would like to have in terms of, a vehicle that is driven by windcraft but can also go over water. I forgot the name. Amphibian vehicles, maybe?
Amphibious, yeah.
Amphibious, right. And so my dad would make that. He would help us build it. And I think that is how we got in touch with with that. And also my dad is an autodidact. So he was one of when computers and networked computers were in the very beginning. He basically taught himself how to build local area networks and how to, use a computer, how to do basic programming, and then showed me this program. And so I started to do some programming. And I think it was just this kind of organic, gradual kind of thing of seeing what my dad was doing that kind of got me into that. And later on in high school, I would even say I had this almost hate-love relationship with scientific topics. So chemistry, was something that I found fascinating. It intrigued me, but I was never good in anything related to math, really enough. So physics, chemistry, etc. And it took much more tangible elements that I could really realize to which degree this was actually what I like doing. Like more, today people say in my work, they say you're like the numbers guy. You eat numbers, you crunch numbers, you are super structured, systematic, but also systemic. And I think, my lean startup fascination, typically lean startup for me is the crossover between arts, creativity, and you need a lot of empathy for understanding, human behavior, customer behavior. They actually call it customer empathy, and a very rigorous scientific approach. It's like a lab approach where you basically go about testing assumptions. So it was really gradual, and I got more and more into, I wouldn't say, I didn't even consider it technology. It was just new ways of approaching things. So I guess that's what happened. It was
interesting.
Very gradual.
Basically, it started with your dad as an inventor and learning how things are built, going through the process of building things from the ground up. What did you, when you went to college, what did you study? What was...
I studied business, economics, and actually funnily enough, I was hesitating between psychology, sociology, languages, and business. And but always again with the same common thread, which was I kind of want to better understand what drives us and why we do what we do on a micro but also on a macro level as human beings. And being very entrepreneurial, and I guess that also comes from my dad. He's built his own company in the tech field, so there you go. And I've always been very entrepreneurial in the sense, and that I guess comes from my mom. Knowing the worth of things, in the sense, price is what you pay, value is what you get. And also in the sense, being mindful of your cent so that you can appreciate your dollar. And and that again was my dad, seeing challenges, obstacles, rather as challenges than hindering me from doing something. More as like, hey, this is something I can solve. This is a challenge I can overcome and create something to overcome it, and by doing so help other people. And so that's where, going around, of course, talking to my parents, talking to friends of mine, etc. Everybody was like, you need to study business. You're like, this is your second nature. And marketing being very much about, again, human behavior. So I chose business and I went for marketing and finance, funnily enough, specialization.
Nice. So there's the numbers in the finance, right? Exactly. After you graduate, what were you doing? Where were you? You were working in the tech world around in the late 90s, right? Can you tell me what you were doing when the bubble burst?
I was starting university in 1999. So that was at the peak of probably, 1-2 years down the road was after when the bubble burst. But so I started university and I actually went to Lausanne. So I'm from the Swiss German speaking part in Switzerland. But since I have also this love for languages, I went to Lausanne to combine the language part. So studying in French with the business part. And so tech still remained something that I was fascinated about. So actually my first internship that I did as a student was with IBM. And I went to the IBM division in Geneva where it was about voice over IP. And that was at the time a huge thing. what today is almost, we're doing this right now. This interview is basically over IP. But yeah, and I did an internship in their marketing department. And a lot of what I did was basically structuring processes, again, finding what is the most relevant information that we need to convey to consumers, to customers. What do we need to build for them? How do we make sure that we internally know, what Zurich is doing versus what Geneva is doing, and it's the same company. So quite early on, I was into that. And I was also dabbling a little bit in investments. Online brokerage was something that was really coming up then. And so I remember I bought Amazon stock for $500, I think. And 2 years later, 1 year later, I think that was later. So it was right before the bubble burst. And it took a huge hit. And I lost 80% of the value. And I, of course, had no experience, so I panicked and I sold everything.
Sold it, yeah, of course.
Right. Of course. And I was like, okay, at least I still have, whatever, $100. Okay. And I did the math not so long ago. I was like, wow, what if I had held on to that?
Not good math to do right now.
No, not good.
Stay away from that math. So after your internship, the bubble burst, you made a decision. Can you tell me about your decision to travel?
Well, actually, chronologically speaking, that was even a little later because I finished my studies, and that was 2003. And because it was probably post-bubble, it was pretty difficult to find a job. And I had worked as a student assistant, as a teaching assistant, so I had a little money on the side at that time. And I was sending out a good number of resumes, and I had a couple of interviews even, but yeah, nothing really came to fruition. And so at that point, I made the decision to let go and to give myself a break, and not to go into like sending another 100 and another 100 more resumes out and go ballistic. And I wanted to keep my focus. I really was pretty strategic about which industries, which kind of companies I applied for, and for what kind of jobs. And since that didn't work out at the time, I was just like, well, maybe it's bad timing. So
I mean, it's your life, right?
Exactly. So I decided to go on a round the world trip.
So you took your $100 from Amazon. Now you're can't find the job that's really resonating with you. Decide to say, just travel the world.
Yeah, which I did. And it was an interesting time because it turned out to be physically around the world trip, but it was basically pieced together between going to see a friend in Australia who was finishing his last semester in Australia, in Sydney. Another friend was at that time doing an English course in Sydney as well. And I had friends over in Mexico. So it was kind of Australia, and then all the way over to Mexico and to California. That was 15 years ago now. And the friend wrote me an email saying that he had just seen this internship in marketing from Nestle, and he knew that I was looking for that kind of internship position. That's another thing, by the way. I was looking specifically for internships rather than actually an entry-level job, because I felt, well, that's kind of a win-win. It's probably easier to get into the company as an intern rather than a fixed, position. Plus, it's kind of you test the waters and you see whether it works for you or not. And so he sends me that. I was, I guess, in Mexico City, and anyhow, was bound to go back home 3 weeks later. So I remember I didn't have a CV ready or anything. I pieced it together and I sent out the mail from Mexico City and applied to that internship position. And probably a couple of days after I got back, I actually received a call from Nestle Switzerland HR, and they invited me for an interview. And the first interview actually went well, but since probably I came back from traveling the world, my then boss, she told me afterwards, well, you still had sand in your hair. You were so relaxed. You were like, And the second thing was I spoke really good French because I had studied in French, but it's not my mother tongue. So my French was not business French. And not apparently, but as a matter of fact, I was using expressions like, okay, cool beans. Like, and she was pretty shocked. She was like, wow, I mean, you're smart, I can tell, but are you serious? Like, are you for real? Are you really interested in this? And that was only at the second interview. They actually reconvened me to a second interview where they wanted to confront me with that. And I was really taken aback, and I was like, wow, I'm so sorry, but thanks for letting me know this. And probably the reason why is this is not my first language, it's not my mother tongue. And then everything changed. He was like, really? I was convinced you were French, not even Swiss French. I thought you were French. And I was like, no. And well, then, yeah, I got the internship position. Then I got a fixed term contract as a product manager. I had an amazing time, and I ended up spending almost 10 years with Nestle. And so, yeah, just testing the waters became an almost 10 years exciting time. So,
all because no business French, or a major reason anyway. And I know that as you worked your way through Nestle, at some point you were in Myanmar. Mm-hmm. And that experience had an effect on you. Could you tell me about that experience?
Mm-hmm. Well, Myanmar was my last assignment with Nestle. It was after I had spent time in marketing, in sales, had the huge pleasure of building a corporate startup within Nestle with Nescafé Dolce Gusto, which is Nespresso's little cousin. And I wanted something even more entrepreneurial or intrapreneurial. And
can you tell me what intrapreneurial is?
Well, basically, it's acting as an entrepreneur within a company. So you're being a corporate entrepreneur, you could say, which is basically what I've always kind of done. And people have even asked me, well, why do you work that way? It's not your company. You're just an employee or salary taker. It's not your company. But it's just the way basically I am. And I either do things fully committed and as if it was my own thing, or I don't. Because otherwise I wouldn't think it's fair to the company and probably to myself either, because I don't have this passion, this power that drives me otherwise. And so I wanted something even more entrepreneurial. And what is more entrepreneurial than actually opening up a new market for a big corporation? And Myanmar was just being allowed even from Nestle's board, the group management basically allowed in 2012, I think, to actually go to do business as Nestle in Myanmar. Before it was, closed and for obvious reasons, politics reasons, not allowed to do business there. And so I got the opportunity to be their head of marketing for Myanmar and basically contribute to building Nestle Myanmar. It was one of the only remaining white spots where they were not present yet, Nestle. Probably next to North Korea, and it was an amazing time. But also it was a very tough time in the sense that I was officially head of marketing, but when I got there, it was a situation where the head of sales took a break for 3 or 4 months, and she welcomed me saying, "Hey, I'm so glad you're here. I need a break, and well, it's all
Peace
yours."
Out. Yeah.
Right.
Good luck.
And kind of to similar tune, the country manager who was there, he was also he was a brilliant man. He was extremely knowledgeable, and he was like a walking encyclopedia. He knew everything about everything. He was a great, diplomat and everything. And however, he was, I would say, as much also preparing his early retirement than building this whole thing. And so that was kind of great for me because he trusted me with that. So, end of the story, I ended up having almost 3, head of marketing, sales, and kind of doing country management at the same time. Plus, it was not exactly wide spot entry. There were already, of course, business was already happening there, and it was a little, let's say, suboptimal. There was a lot of things to basically revamp and optimize. And then I, as a Swiss, super structured and organized and come into this context of very entrepreneurial, where everything is kind of in the process of being built. But that's also what I like. That's what I think I'm pretty good at. But then also the culture, of course, is completely different between, Buddhist mentality and my mentality. Even the term deadline, well, death is just, it's temporary because you get reborn, right? It's a cycle. So if it's not happening in this life, it's going to happen in the next life. So you can imagine when I was talking with the team, sometimes I was getting stressed out and they were like, "Don't you worry, boss. It's all good." I was like, yeah.
If it doesn't happen this life, it'll happen the next life. No big deal.
And actually that was amazing. It was, to me, probably one of the greatest lessons to just sometimes let go of things. And there's this saying, I think it's a prayer. I don't know who to attribute it to. It goes something like this: give me the strength to change what I can change, the serenity to let go of what I cannot change, and the wisdom to tell the difference. And I guess that's exactly what the major challenge was, because I was driving myself crazy with stuff that I probably could not change, or I didn't even have to change. I just had to accept. And so I guess I learned more about myself in this. It was roughly a year, because I then cut it short, actually, because I was feeling, wow, this is over the top. This is too much. Plus, on the personal side, distance relationship, there were a couple of things where it was like, wow, I want to do something else, and I need a break myself, basically. But it was an amazing time. And a friend of mine whom I met there in Myanmar, he always says, "I have left Myanmar, but Myanmar will never leave me." And I feel the same way. And I'm extremely grateful for that time, for the people that I've met, for the learnings that I was able to make. And from a human perspective, the Myanmar people, they're incredible. They're genuinely good and caring and giving people. And there's actually this clerical system with the monks, which is a revolving doors kind of thing. So every Burmese citizen, the idea is that at least once or even several times in his life, he actually does a stint in a monastery, living as a monk. And I think that is the ultimate empathy building thing, when you actually literally put yourself into the shoes of someone else, like being a monk, living as a monk. And they give so much. Even the poorest people give most of what they have, in that case, to the monks, to feed the monks. So there's so many things in that sense, humanly speaking, from a human perspective, that profoundly touched me and I guess changed me.
I think it's a lot of times easy for us to believe that we have empathy for whatever situation that we think about or consider. But it's not until we put ourselves in that situation that we truly do have empathy. One of my guests, Dave Hollis, him and his wife adopted a little girl of color. And so they were going to church with a bunch of people that looked like me. And so they went to a different church. And it was there that he learned that culturally, like, you can think that you understand, you can think you have empathy, but until you're immersed in that culture, you're not really going to understand. I can imagine for you, being this guy that sees the challenges, loves overcoming them and coming up with solutions, being able to let go, being a tough thing.
Yeah.
How did it feel when you let go?
Amazing. And it's a constant struggle. I always say I'm a recovering perfectionist, because I was driving myself crazy sometimes with, the opposite of the Pareto principle, the 80-20 rule. I was like at 88 or 98 and I wanted to get the last 2% done. And with experience and also, getting a bloody nose probably repeatedly, I just realized, hey, it doesn't have to be perfect. Even more so, it is better to be 80-20 and aim for excellence and not for perfection. And that's, again, where also this whole lean startup thing that I'm so passionate about comes in. It's really building something like what they call a minimum viable product, which the goal of this is to learn as much as you can with as minimum effort as you can put behind it, but to maximize the learning. And letting go is probably still one of the most challenging behaviors for me, because I it's a strength and the weakness at the same time. It's like this Achilles heel. I think I'm pretty good at what I do because I care, because I put this passion behind what I consider purposeful activity, and so I go full blast. But then that's exactly the tricky part. Then there's still this thin kind of line, this frontier where you need to realize, and I need to realize, okay, now I need to just chill a little, and that's what literally in Myanmar, one of my coworkers, he was saying, chill, boss. Oh, good. Chill.
You need to go travel the world again for another half a year and just, and so these things that you kind of become obsessive about, let's transition to leaving Nestle. And I want to talk about the blockchain. It's something that I myself am passionate about as well. So I guess firstly, I want to ask, you've been around technology through the internet bubble, beyond. Has blockchain grabbed you like the internet did in the early 2000s?
Absolutely. Even more so, I would say. The blockchain specifically, Bitcoin, not that much, which is kind of, I have never realized why, but I didn't really catch on to Bitcoin when it came about. I was kind of, I had this blind spot somehow. But what really piqued my interest was Ethereum. And that was in end 2015. So I wasn't really around when it went live, when they had their ICO. I think that was July 15. I got in touch with it beginning 2016. And when I started to dig deeper and realized what, in my opinion, is completely transformative in terms of potential and the mindset that it incorporates, basically, to me, it's more than just technology. It's really this giving power back to the people thing, which I'm passionate about. I'm all about individual freedom, creative collaborative problem solving, and technology helping humans and not the other way around. So technology at the service of humans, not the other way around. And that is what I believe blockchain is all about.
When you say freedom, can you, it's a fairly intangible word that means a lot of different things to different people. Can you make it more concrete for me? What is freedom to you?
Freedom to me is a double-sided sword. It's like there's a trade-off between safety, security, and freedom. Freedom in the sense, freedom of choice, freedom of choosing for yourself what suits you while still respecting, the freedom of your the next person to you, around you. Not in the sense everything is permitted and I don't care about anyone else, but really like being free to harmoniously coexist with your peers, with society. And safety, on the other hand, is like having, and it's always a blend. There needs to be a good mix between freedom and security. But I tend to believe that today we have a little too much security, in the sense governments over-regulating, over kind of wanting to protect you to an extent that it becomes almost a self-fulfilling prophecy that they need to further protect you because people would launch lawsuits because they can. And so you need further protection from people who would actually potentially launch lawsuits. And so it ends up now being here in California that when you go to a coffee shop in California and they have this huge panel saying coffee is known to the state of California to contain substances that can harm you in whichever way, which probably as a Swiss and as myself is borderline ridiculous, honestly. That's what I mean. It's like, yes, it's, or to phrase it in another way, it's being the captain of my soul, the master of my fate. That is really what I believe in. And you have no one to blame than yourself. It's not your boss's fault. It's not your government's fault or anyone else's fault. It's you. It's about what you do with your life. It's about, you are free to do. You are in charge and you can react or you can be proactive. That's what I mean. This freedom is really what I value very much. And I believe blockchain, to a large number of applicational items, is exactly what that incorporates as well. So trust through a trustless system is what I'm fascinated by. And then empowering the individual contributors, parts of this network, without an intermediary, or with very limited, say, power of intermediaries. And I think that is freedom. That gives you possibilities. It also forces you to then be very careful. And you were mentioning that when you do a wrong transaction and you send Bitcoin to a wallet you didn't want to, you mess up the address of the wallet, well, it's gone. So that is what I mean. You're free to do a number of things, but you have to be cautious and managing it correctly and doing things correctly, because there's no one who will then help you or bail you out or anything.
Yeah, you have to be accountable yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to accept that accountability. Mm-hmm. And when you talked about being reactive versus proactive, that automatically made me think of mindfulness and having this awareness of why things are happening, why you're unhappy with certain things in your life. And when you have that awareness, you're not reacting to the things. You are asking yourself, how can I do better and overcome those things, which is just a monumental shift in perception. Okay, so can you tell me about your personal system for continual learning? How do you go about learning on an ongoing basis?
I guess it's really trying to ask the right questions and it's a mix of empathy, trying to really deeply understand on not just a rational level, but on an emotional level, if not even spiritual level, what is it that this triggers, be it with myself or with a customer, a person that I'm interacting with. And I guess it's really trying to go to the depth of things and to understand them, not just at the surface, but really what is the underlying mechanism there. That's one thing. The other thing is really going, like, I have this crazy curiosity. I that's something I love also about my girlfriend. She asks questions sometimes and she works with kids. From a kid's standpoint, she questions things that an adult would consider obvious, but because she does so, I think you gain a deeper level of understanding. So continuous curiosity, not just scratching the surface, going deeper, and again, empathy, and then testing, trial and error, continuous improvement.
How can you tell if you're asking the wrong question?
Well, the wrong question would be if I take this example again, in Myanmar, so is everything clear? Yes. That's the wrong question. The right question would be, so what is your understanding now of the situation we're in? Okay, that gives me the opportunity to understand, to have this kind of mirror effect. So was I clear? Do I have the same understanding? Is there a significant gap? Why is there that gap? Can we close it? And can we come to a consensus of what we agree to do and what can be done by whom, by when? So really, not just closed questions, open questions, and then peel off layers of the onion, right? Until you get to that point where you're actually at the core and work back from there.
As a professional poker player, as a question asker, I know that the power of the right question is, it's the difference between something being horrible and just completely crashing and burning, and the difference between having immense success. Really putting a lot of thought into whether or not you're investing your energy into asking questions that you ought to be figuring out. So, Oliver, can you tell me, what does your typical morning routine look like? How do you prepare yourself for your days?
Well, I'm building more physical exercise into it again. That is what it was typically looking like, at least until a couple of months back. I had a shoulder injury, which prevented me from that. But usually it's really like getting up, exercising, taking a shower, and then it's learning and nourishing myself. So it's reading. I'm a voracious reader, and while doing so, things that I consider the most interesting and the most helpful, I actually catalog them in some sort of online digital magazine, if you want, which I then share with other people. And
nice.
So it's really about physical emotional but also mental kind of nourishment, and a part of that would be meditation. But even that, I have to admit, I need to get back into that again. So it's building this habit and then sticking with it, and I have not been sticking with it enough for the last months, actually.
I've never understood all of those quotes that say that once you have a habit built, it's like impossible to break, because it is so easy for me to break my habits. Like it doesn't, something that my body's resisting against in the first place. If I make an excuse, boom, it's easy to break. It's easy for me to lay on the couch and watch TV versus meditating or doing the things that I know I ought to be doing, or sitting down and playing Rocket League on my PlayStation. That's the one that crushes me. Regarding reading, are you a rabid fan of any blogs or resources? And if so, which ones?
I would say Tim Ferriss is someone I really admire. What he shares, the way he's all about learning and deconstructing and going to the core and sequencing and putting things in the right order. And I read his books, and I continuously read his blog. So that is really a resource I would recommend, the 4-Hour Blog. Also, it's not just reading; it's also when it's kind of a multimedia kind of thing. So YouTube is another huge learning source for me, and I follow a lot of different YouTubers or YouTube channels. There's stuff like Gary Vaynerchuk is, someone who I think is pretty, what is the word? Segmenting. I think people either love him or hate him. I have this kind of, I respect the guy. I think, yes, he's over the top. He's super everything, but he has a point. And I think where he's really strong is again, empathy. And even if sometimes he may not come over that way, I really believe he's humble, and he's all about learning and all about understanding people and caring for people. So that's another great resource. The Gary V series, Ask Gary V on YouTube. Further reading is also what I do. That's part of my system. Is I have a research engine basically set up in a tool that I use, and that is targeted according to my key interests. So again, learning, marketing, tech, etc., etc. And so what I love is then that feeds me with stuff that pop up, and I filter that and absorb it, and then refilter it and put it on my e-magazines.
I love it. I would like to get a hold of that system. What system is it?
Well, it's
is it a program, software? Yeah,
the tool is called Scoop It. And it's basically the tool which allows you to create this e-magazine. But what is pretty interesting is there's a search engine built into it. And so it goes beyond Google. It is I consider it pretty powerful. And it always surprises me with new interesting stuff that I then discover. And then you subscribe to the RSS feed. And then you kind of, build it and customize it and make it further kind of converging to your key interests. But it still opens your horizon to other things by triggering. So it's pretty interesting. I
love that. Scoop it. Efficiency.
Yep.
Don't like having to search for things that I might love. Just bring them to me. Put them on my doorstep. Do you have any books that you reread every few years? And if so, which ones?
Yes. The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, Stephen Covey. Probably every other year I reread it. Because it's just, again, you said it very well before. It's building the habit does not mean keeping it forever. I know that I lose it again. And then, however, reinstalling it, reinstating it helps. And there's one graphic that I think is really powerful in that book. It's basically, it's a spiral. So it's an upgoing circle which turns into a spiral. And that's how I feel. It's whenever I reread this book, I kind of probably elevate my understanding of it. And then my practice of it becomes also more powerful, I would say. Even if I go maybe off track in between, but that's also, again, part of, trial and error or continuous improvement. So that for sure is one book that I reread. Another one was The 4-Hour Body. Tim Ferriss, also again about, how to physically be at your best self, basically. How can you really live as healthily as possible? And I'm not about, gaining muscle, etc., but just really being fit and being healthy. So that's on that side. Other books, Peter Diamandis, the founder or co-founder of Singularity University, Abundance and Bold. These two books I consider simply amazing. It's about not just entrepreneurship, it's about social impact entrepreneurship. And Abundance, the thesis is basically the world is much better off than what we're made to believe. It's just that how humans are wired, we tend to remember the negative stuff more and focus on it more. And we are not good in exponential thinking. We're good at linear extrapolation, but not exponential. So we always kind of underestimate the progress that technology makes possible and the speed of this progress. And that is what I love about this Abundance book. And Bold by, again, this Peter Diamandis is something I've started to reread recently. It's all about entrepreneurship for social impact. And he says something along the lines, well, if you want to become a billionaire, just find a problem that 1 billion people have and the money will take care of itself. But do good, solve good challenges. And that's...
I have read Bold. And it's not just people, but organizations as well are bad at exponential thinking. Poor Kodak. Bye Kodak. Sorry. Sorry it happened to you. So what's a common assumption that people make about their lives that you think they should spend some more time thinking about?
Depends on what level. Very generically speaking, pretty high levels, probably, well, it's just how it is. For XYZ reason, I'm in this situation right now and I cannot do anything about it. That's it. That's kind of my role. That's my life. That's just how it's going to be. And I believe, and that's also from experience when talking with friends or even with clients, when you then, again, peel off these layers of the onion and go to the core, then pretty soon it's just fear. It comes down to fear. And it's like fear of change and getting out of your comfort zone. Because yes, you're kind of comfortable, even if that may sound counterintuitive, but apparently complaining is comfortable. Because then I'm, again, not responsible. I have this, I can complain because, if only this were not the case, if only that were true, if only, then I wouldn't be in this situation. Well, I have not yet encountered any situation of anyone where there was not something to be done by this very same person to change that. So I think it's really when you dig deeper, you realize you're just scared, and that's fine. I'm not valuing that. I mean, everyone has their fears, and everyone is scared, and change is messy, and getting out of your comfort zone is difficult. But I believe and that sounds cheesy, I know, but it's where the biggest growth happens. It's where you stretch yourself. When you're what seems scary in the beginning, once you've done it, you cannot even imagine why you found it scary in the first place.
Yeah, I think fundamentally, we know how we are today. We don't know how we will be if we grow tomorrow. And everybody ought to be thinking, if you're dissatisfied with your life, what steps can we take? We are the authors of our own stories. And I think even having an awareness that we're afraid is enough to start considering change. And some people maybe don't have awareness that they're afraid. It may manifest in different things or different rationalizations, but the root of it, like you said, is fear. And people do, if you have an awareness that you're afraid, then I think that can a lot of times spur people to action.
And I guess it's also realizing and admitting that it's not a bad thing, that there's nothing to be ashamed of by being, afraid, by having fear of something. It's okay, right? And the other thing is, and that's what I like about again, back to cultures, languages, I believe language really frame and convey our world vision, or like our mental models of the world. And what I like about the American kind of way of thinking is I make a decision. So it's kind of you construct your own luck. Whereas in French, for instance, you say prendre une décision, which means choosing a decision, taking a decision. So it's
something somebody gave to you.
Assumption. It's given to you. There's only a finite set of options that are available to you, and you have to choose. Versus, you can create your own. If what is around doesn't suit you for any reason, well, create your own. Combine, deconstruct, recompose, create something new. And that's, again, back to languages, cultures, mindset. That's what is so fascinating.
And I know that I'm the question asker, but I want to say, too, I think that something people ought to spend more time thinking about is the words that they use in their life. Because words are so powerful. They're what separate us from everything else on the planet, communication. And when you start telling stories and you are reacting with poor word choices, they have a dramatic effect on the actions that you take and your perspective in life. Words are so much more powerful than people ever take the time to really consider. So be very conscious and use good words, use good phrasing, and have an awareness when you are being overly negative and when you are having these saying these self-defeating things.
And it's interesting you would say that. I think the Talmud has this, be mindful of your thoughts because they become your words. Same about words because they become your actions, and actions become your habits. Something, and that goes full circle. So it's how you live basically starts with how you think, how you perceive, how you word, how you act.
I think that even using your words in a lot of cases defines your thoughts. It defines the thoughts that happen after your words. So absolutely. Yeah, it's just very, very, very important. There's a book, Words Can Change Your Brain, that people should check out because I love that book. Okay, so throughout your life, have you ever strongly believed something only to reverse course later on? And if so, what led to that change of belief?
Challenging one.
I'll save it for the end, close to the end.
Yes. I believe that I had to choose between... That goes back when I made the decision to move on basically from Nestle to do something else. And I had... in the past been with Nestle, so this huge, multinational matrix, global matrix organization, and in parallel was a member of the board of my father's company. So high-tech, small business, completely different, complementary to big business, big corporates. And my belief was, already when I was a student, was, okay, now I need to make this choice. Either I go into a big multinational corporation or I join a small business or a startup. And I realized much later and gradually that you can be, even within a big multinational corporation, you can be an entrepreneur. You can act entrepreneurially. And then further down the road, when I decided to move on, again, I was like, okay, now what do I do next? Well, actually, I want to create my business. I want to really be an entrepreneur as such. I knew that. And then the next question was, okay, so what do I focus on? Is it big corporates or is it small startups and small businesses? I need to make a choice. And I was like, I realized, no, I don't have to. That's exactly what differentiates me, like with my experience, with my, specific profile of having both in my backpack, so to speak. That is exactly what differentiates me and what probably is sought after by both, because I can really bring the best of both worlds together. So I don't have to make that choice, even as an entrepreneur, let alone as an employee. And I can actually help, and that's what I made my mission, basically. I can help both. I can help startups be more structured, be more, process-oriented, get the best of what big corporates do very well. And I can help big corporates to become more entrepreneurial, more, the lean startup again, more experiment-driven, agile, have this tolerance of failure by seeing failure not as failure, but as learning opportunities and actually build upon that. So I believed I needed to make that choice, and I came to the realization that no, I don't have to. On the contrary, it's actually great to combine these two worlds.
I love that. And again, it comes back to asking the right question. Starting by asking yourself, what I need to choose, but then asking yourself, why do I need to choose? Do I really need to choose? And if you ask yourself, do I really need to choose? Then you can come to that conclusion. So asking great questions, again, can change your life. So if you could share one truth with the world, what would that truth be?
Yes, what I really love to quote is John Lennon. Life is what's happening while you're busy making other plans. And I believe that to be very true. And I love making plans, but I love the flexibility for life happening into those plans. I guess this is really this creative space, this unplannable, amazing thing, that is life, that is happening, and that you can influence. And yes, you can be the master of your fate, the captain of your soul, but you also need to accept that you have to let go, and you can influence it to a certain degree, but you cannot completely plan it out, and it's never going to happen exactly the way you intended it to be. So I believe that to be extremely true. As
your friend Adrian said, having checklists for all these problems would get boring anyway. So we need a little chaos and uncertainty to Absolutely. Find new problems to overcome. But yeah, there's with mindfulness and every day, even when you're planning, life is happening. Be grateful for what you have and be grateful for the ability to plan and be grateful for your life. I think it's just a massive tragedy if people get to the end of their life and they've been preparing to live the whole time. And that's it, right?
And that's another truth you just mentioned. The gratefulness, I think, is so powerful. I believe it's Tony Robbins says that if you feel truly grateful, it supplants any negative emotions because there's no room for them. Once you start feeling grateful, you cannot feel, frustrated or sad or angry or anything else at that time when you're truly grateful. And again, that mindset shift in whichever situation you find yourself in, just to remember. That's actually also part of which I didn't even mention of my routine is just gratitude, right? So what am I grateful for? And it changes your life.
It does. And I've told the story probably, 4 or 5 times on this podcast, but I practice gratefulness every day and I think about it as something that I focus on, and I find myself in negative situations and then realizing during having awareness during the negative situations that I have a lot to be grateful for, that maybe this situation only occurs 10% of the time and 90% of the time I don't notice it. I'm completely ungrateful, but I notice the 10%. Having awareness for the 90% when it's happening to you and there's no friction in your life, when traffic is just smooth sailing and there's, be grateful for that. That's an opportunity to be grateful. Okay. Final thing. Where can my audience find you on the World Wide Webs?
The easiest is probably LinkedIn, Twitter. And anyhow, I share most of what I was mentioning, about my reading and then sharing it over Scoop It. I share those links that I consider worth reading and intriguing and helpful, hopefully, to other folks as well. I share them over these mainly, so Twitter and LinkedIn.
So you're gonna get one Scoop It follower at the end of this conversation, I think.
Great. That's great. Yeah, and then I'm building as we speak the website for my new business for SwissLEAP. That is, of course, also what I want to build upon and make stronger. That is the very business I've started in August, so it's very recent, and that's another kind of my website which I have never built. Now it's the company's website that we're building.
Awesome, man. We'll get all that up in the show notes, and thank you very much for taking the time out of your busy life, out of doing all the things that you do, to have this conversation with me. I enjoyed it greatly.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Next time on the Process Podcast, I have with me the founder of GetWarriorTough.com and the author of 7 Secrets of Resilient Parents, Andrew Whitman, PhD.
Right. Frankly, everything else is just putting Band-Aids on bullet holes. Treating symptoms is not an answer. And it's separate. And this is one of the things I say in the book, right? Don't confuse your kids' behavior, being disappointed in their kids' behavior, with being disappointed in them. I've never told my kids I was disappointed in them. I may have told them behavior was not acceptable, but that had nothing to do with them as a person, right? So I separate out behavior from the person. And that's really in every relationship that you have. Employee, employer, the kids on the playground, teammates, neighbors. Separate out their behavior from who they are.
Be sure to subscribe in Apple Podcasts or head to mentallyinvincible.com and join my email newsletter, because this is an episode you don't want to miss.